There we go.
Hi, everyone. A very special video podcast interview, and it's the first of its kind. So I hope you all be gentle with me. But my first guest on this podcast is a lovely lady, and I am absolutely thrilled to have her. And we've been in contact for some time, and she has such a fascinating story that I think can be of benefit to most people. I think most people can learn from what she has to say and from her journey through trauma, through developing techniques to help release that trauma, to developing a form of enlightenment, and has certainly taught me a few things through our correspondence. So, welcome to the podcast, Ann Hince.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, what I'd just like to start with, Ann, if that's okay, I just want to for you to talk as much as you're comfortable with, because I'm sure you could just read off a script by now, just about your early life, your childhood, and kind of what's led you up to the point of seeking help for the traumas that you went through your early life. Just whatever you're comfortable with, because I think that people need to understand where you've come from and how you've came along in your journey to developing and releasing those traumas that you have experienced within your early childhood, potentially later on in life. As I think it can really inspire people and really let people know that they're not on their own. There are other people who have went through this and who have successfully released that trauma and have made a life for themselves, and are now not only made a life for themselves, but now giving advice and sharing what they have learned with others. So I think your story is such incredibly important. So just whenever you're ready.
Sure. Yeah. I grew up, I was actually adopted into a family. So that was kind of my first trauma. Actually, my first trauma was probably being born with my right foot up against my right shin. So I had physical therapy for the first 6 weeks. And then I was adopted into a family who had already had an adopted son. And then they adopted a daughter, and the birth mother changed her mind at 6 months. So the daughter was taken away and I was the replacement. Okay. So yeah, that created some trauma in me to begin with, which obviously I didn't realize until many, many years later. And we moved around the world. By the time I was 16, I had lived on 4 continents in 5 different countries. So that was nice. That was a good part of my childhood. But both parents.
Could you give us an idea? Could you let us know what places that you?
Which countries?
Yeah.
Sure. We moved to Barbados when I was 6 months old. And then we moved to Sierra Leone in West Africa when I was 2 or 3. We lived there for 2 or 3 years. And then we went back to England, and then we moved to Hong Kong for a few years. While we lived in Hong Kong, after a couple of years, I was sent to boarding school in England. So at age 9, I was sent to boarding school way across the world. And I was sent to a boys' boarding school because my brother was there. So I was the first girl boarder at this boys' school. There were some day girls, but they went home at the end of the day, and I was teased mercilessly. It was a really, really awful time. And then 2 years later, I went to a girls' boarding school. And meanwhile, my parents moved back from Hong Kong, and then we moved to Bahrain in the Persian Gulf. And I was still at boarding school, so I went back and forth during vacations. And then, both my parents became alcoholic. They started to drink more and more, and it was really hell. Those teenage years was really hell. My dad would drink from as soon as the pub opened until it closed, and then come home and fall asleep or drink more.
Where was at the time that your father had developed alcoholism? Where were you living, or was he living in a different country from you?
Mostly in England. He at that point, he did go back and forth. He worked in Saudi Arabia, but because that wasn't a good place for women to be, we stayed at home in England. But he would come back for 6 months at a time. So he would be drinking, and then my mum would start drinking when he got home from the pub, and she would drink a bottle of sherry a day. So it was really very difficult. My dad had anger issues, so we were always walking on eggshells. He didn't like loud noises. He didn't like anyone else's opinions. So that's where a lot of that trauma got stored. And then one day when I was 19, he was in Saudi Arabia at the time. We had been told 6 months prior that our mum had cancer. She had throat and lung cancer from smoking and drinking. And we only talked about it that one day. That's it. We mentioned it one day. We never talked about it again. And then one day when I was 19, I woke up one morning and found her dead on the bathroom floor. And there was no one else in the house at the time. So I had to, get hold of people and deal with that.
It certainly sounds like you've had a very chaotic childhood. What sticks out to me there is it must have been so disorientating for you, because I think everybody knows when they go on holiday, everything's new, or even if you're staying for a short stay somewhere, you have to get used to the culture, get used to the language, get used to the customs. You were a young child growing up, trying to find your identity. Maybe you've moved to one place and maybe you're just settling in, thinking about maybe developing friends or meeting friends, and maybe you're uprooted in a completely different culture, somewhere far flung across the world. For me, that must have been very disorientating and very, you mustn't have settled and mustn't have been able to make friends on top of all of the other issues that you had.
Well, I could make friends, but they didn't last, right? You only made friends for a year or two and then it was gone, right? We didn't have social media back then. There was no way to keep in touch with them. So they were gone. So I think that's probably one of the reasons why we were sent to boarding school, to have some form of stability. Although, that in itself is a trauma, to be away from home and away from everybody you know. So, yeah.
Okay, so that on top of all that, finding your mother dead on the bathroom floor, I really can't imagine. I guess either you must have had one or two responses. You break down immediately in absolute tears, or you somehow go within yourself and potentially bottle in emotions up.
Yeah, well, I pretty much went into shock. That's for sure. And I just didn't know what to do. We never talked about emotions. We never talked about anything of depth in childhood. So I had no idea what to do with it. So life just went on. And it was really strange to have life go on when something major like that had happened. But life does go on, and now I know how to deal with it differently, but
yeah,
didn't know what to do back.
But you were 19 at the time with no, potentially no one to fall back on. Was there any relations or any other family that, you could have turned to in this situation and this grief that you felt? How did you overcome that? From being a 19-year-old on their own, looking at the death of her mother and trying to find their way in the world, potentially going, well, now I need to get a job and get a house or whatever on my own, things like that there.
Yeah, I was in university at the time, but I was at home on a work, doing 6 months in industry. So I had that to go back to, but it was just all messed up. There wasn't really anyone. We didn't know anyone because we had not really lived there. So we didn't have any neighbors that I knew. My brother was around. He was not home that night. He was staying in his girlfriend's house and I had never met her. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know where he was. But I called his work and they went and found him and brought him back. And I called my dad. He came back from Saudi Arabia a few days or so later. So we got through it. But my dad, the first thing he wanted to do is get everything that belonged to my mother out of the house. So we had to get rid of all of her things, all the photos, everything he wanted out of the house straight away. So it was a really kind of strange time. I think people go through that differently. I don't think a lot of husbands do that when their wives die. A lot of them want to keep things around, but for some reason he didn't.
Okay, so even more trauma then for you to deal with potentially in your later life. So just fast forward then to whatever point that you feel comfortable talking about.
Sure. So I finished university and I moved straight out to the States because my dad wanted me to stay home and be the housekeeper. And I wasn't going to do that. So I moved out to the States and I worked as a software engineer and got married and had kids. And it wasn't until that point I had some kind of it was like a business altercation with a couple of other mothers at school. I didn't do anything wrong, but they thought I'd done something wrong. And my mind just kept going around and around in circles, and I couldn't sleep for days. And I realized this isn't normal. Most people don't do this. So that was when I really realized it was something, must be something from my childhood that I hadn't dealt with that was making me do this. Because I was really reactionary. I was still really fearful. And now I have 2 young boys. And it's, you know, they're getting older. They're getting to the age that I was when I went to the boarding school and had to experience what boys of 9 to 11 are like. So I knew I had a lot of work to do. And so around this time, I went to a doctor's appointment. I don't remember why I went there, but he recognized that I was really very stressed. And so he asked me on a scale of 0 to 10 what I was, and it was an 8. And then he asked me why that was. And I knew at that point it was because of finding my mother 2 decades earlier, because the tears were still there just under the surface. They hadn't gone anywhere. And that was my first realization that those memories, that stuck energy, it's just stored in our body. And then he worked with me with this technique that's called EFT, it's called Emotional Freedom Technique. He worked with me for about 15 minutes, and I walked away being able to tell the story in my mind without those tears anymore. So that was the first step for me. That's when I realized I could do something about this.
Wow. Wow. And so from then on, then did you, I think I read that you obviously didn't go to a practitioner, that you started looking into the EFT yourself as to how you could develop and utilize it yourself without going to a practitioner. So what then would have been the next step then for you? At what point did you start utilizing this on an everyday basis?
I had to check that it worked. I have an engineering background. I wanted to know that that wasn't a fluke. So I had a 17-year-old cat at home, and we were told he needed daily saline shots. And the first time I gave him a shot, my hand was just shaking uncontrollably. I was so scared of doing that. And so I thought, oh gosh, this is going to be a good test case. So I tapped. So it's also called tapping. EFT is called tapping because we're tapping on places in the body as we're talking through something. So I tapped about my fear of giving him the injection, my fear of hurting him or slipping, my history around injections, because I had a lot of injections because I've been to all these different countries. So the next day, when I gave him the shot, the needle just slid right in and my hand was totally calm, 100% different from the day before. So that's when I realized that this technique is deceptively powerful. Right? It's kind of weird. It looks strange. Doesn't look like it's really doing much. But boy, that was such a huge shift. So, okay, so I started doing it. The person who developed it, Gary Craig, he was a chemical engineer, and he gave the technique away for free. So it was really nice. So I could find the little booklet on how to do it. He had videos on YouTube on how to do it. And so I just taught myself to do it. And I started, it took a while, but I started to recognize during the day when I was emotional. Right. And to begin with, maybe once a day, I would recognize it and be able to actually stop and tap. And as we do more and more, it becomes easier and easier to recognize that. And so I just started doing it during the day. I'd notice I was emotional. I would tap, I would relax, and then I go on with my day. And I noticed my mind becoming quiet, which was so nice. Wow. But I wanted more. I think I'm a little bit like you in that way. I really wanted more. So I knew you could actually write down. So I wrote down all my emotional memories from childhood, everything that I could remember. And I tapped through them one each day for about an hour to an hour and a half each night. And I just found my mind becoming quieter and more peaceful. And I was looking for that peace. And it was amazing.
Wow. Now, obviously, I know a bit about EFT. One of my previous guests is a very big practitioner on it. Offit has been doing it for so many years. And I know that I think they held, was it the 21st summit there recently with Nick Order, I think. But just for anyone who obviously doesn't know about EFT, it sounds to be this amazing technique in which you can release a lot of trauma, a lot of emotional baggage. You just explain to anyone watching this here exactly what it is and how it works and where it actually originated to your knowledge.
Yes, it's a little bit like acupressure, because we're tapping on the ends of meridian systems. And as we're doing that, it's kind of disrupting the normal pattern in our nervous system. And it's letting that stuck energy of those emotions dissipate out of the body. So what we're doing is we're tapping on different points. So the first point we start tapping on is the karate chop point on the side of the hand. And we're tapping firm enough that we're making a difference, but we don't want to be gentle. We want to be firm, but we don't want to hurt ourselves. So somewhere in the middle. And we're tapping as we say an opening statement. We talk about what we're going to be working on. And my statement's a little bit different from the original one. So I might say something like, even though my dad was shouting at me, that's my truth in this moment. And it's okay that I think that. And then we say that 3 times. Even though my dad's shouting at me, that's my truth at the moment. And it's okay that I say that. Even though my dad was shouting at me, that's my truth in this moment. It's okay that I say that. And then we move on to the next point. So the next point is the crown point on the top of the head. And I would just say the words. I'd shorten it down and just say what it actually was. My dad was shouting at me as I'm tapping. The next point is the beginning of the eyebrow. My dad was shouting at me. The edge of the eye, the bone on the edge of the eye, my dad was shouting at me. The bone under the eye, my dad was shouting at me. On the upper lip, my dad was shouting at me. On the chin, my dad was shouting at me. The collarbone, my dad was shouting at me. And then about 4 inches under the arm, my dad was shouting at me. I take a deep breath, I let it go, and then I see how that feels again. And the great thing about EFT is it gives you feedback, so you know if it's working. So there's obvious changes, like the tone of your voice will change as you're saying something, right? You might be really emotional to begin with. You might be, ready to cry or really angry, but as you say it, as the energy dissipates, your voice will change. But also some people will yawn. Some people will burp. Tears are always a release of resistance. And some people will get really tired or take a big sigh. And all of those are evidence, which I really like to know, that engineering background again, I like to know it's working. So the evidence that it's actually, the energy is actually releasing out of the body. So we do it over and over again. And as you do, you were opening up the subconscious mind. So with my mother, I tapped with the doctor the first time on the outer layers of the story, like the big parts of the story, and let go the big tears, right, the big emotions. But I did have to come back to it again and again to work on the smaller aspects, the more details. So with a story like that, I would start at the beginning of the story. I woke up and I would tap as I'm doing this. I woke up to a quiet house. And that in itself was scary because my mother always had the radio playing when I woke up in the morning. So that's a part of the story that I didn't have the first time I told the story, but it opened up from my subconscious mind as I did more tapping. So then I would talk through the whole story and tap through it, especially on the emotional parts, and then come back to the beginning again and tell the story again. And I do it again and again until it gets to the point where it just sounds like I'm reading from a storybook. There's no emotion left in it anymore. And at that point, you know that you have released that tension from the body.
Wow. And obviously you've been a practitioner of this for so many years. And I know that from reading your book and listening to your previous interviews is that this just isn't a simple 1 week, 1 month, 1 year process for anyone, especially like yourself and many people out there who have deeply held subconscious trauma. And you've described it like peeling the layers away from an onion, that you shade these outer layers and think that everything, I guess, is fine until you find within yourself that I'm actually not quite fine. I feel that there's more deeply held trauma within myself. Could you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, it is. It's peeling back the layers. And you, as I said, you're opening up the subconscious mind. And as you do that, as you release a layer, it relaxes. And then the next layer pops up. So a memory might pop up that you couldn't remember before because it was stuck in the subconscious. But then it pops up, and then that's your next layer to work on. Yeah. So as I kept going, I realized that it's expanding the awareness as well, right? So when I started this, I wasn't aware of how I felt. If someone asked me how I felt today, how are you feeling today, Anne? I'm fine. I was always fine because I didn't know how I felt. But I had started to become aware of how I was really feeling. So that's the first layer, is the emotional layer. But underneath every emotion is a set of physical sensations. So underneath frustration, you might be feeling tension in the solar plexus or the stomach or the chest or the jaw. And we call it frustration. But when we do, we dissociate from those feelings. So what we're doing is we're reversing that process. So I started to become aware of those physical sensations underneath, which is a deeper level of awareness. Yeah. So, with my story with my mum, I knew what happened to begin with, right? I knew the events of what happened during the day. And then I started to become aware of the emotions that I was feeling during that event. And then I became aware of the physical sensations of that tension I was holding in myself during that. And those arose over a period of time. And then I would have to work with them, or I would work with them. I'd feel them and let them go. And then that opens up the next layer. I kind of talk of it like it's like a rope that's bent over, right? You cut one strand of it, and then tension is taken up by the next strands. Then you've got more things to work with. Let go of those, and then there's a layer underneath. And that's what we're doing.
It's an amazing hearing you talk about that, because it is something that I can relate to too. And I think this is a problem with society in general, is that we don't associate. We just, as you say, give off an emotion. Just say, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling frustrated, without actually taking the time to actually say, well, where is that coming from? Why do I feel like that? What is that feeling, and where is that feeling being stored within my body? And most people just seem to be displaying those emotions, or utilizing those emotions without actually taking the time to do the inner work, to actually sit down and discover why, but what does that mean? Why do I feel like that? Or that emotion that I've given a name to, what does that feel, or where does that feel within my body? So it's something that I can very, very relate to. And so you've done this for a number of years, and I know, sorry if I'm jumping forward, that you complemented this with a few other techniques on top of that.
Well, after I'd done enough EFT, I realized I actually didn't need to do that anymore. Once I was aware of the physical sensations, I could tap on them, right? I could tap on the wording would be something like, even though I feel this frustration in my solar plexus, right? And then we're focusing on that tension in the solar plexus, which will release, and that will release it. But I didn't feel like I needed that. And I'd been to a group at the time, and this guy in the group said, it's not about meditation. You don't have to meditate. It's all about feeling your feelings. But I don't know what he meant when he first said that, because I was just starting on this tapping journey. But down the road a few months, and he said it every week, I thought, okay, I'm going to try and do what he says, because now I know where my feelings are. So I would stop. I would be at the kitchen sink doing the dishes, and I would notice I was feeling something, or I'd think a thought that had emotions attached to it, and I would feel where they were in my body, and I would just try and feel them, but they would kind of squirm away. I couldn't keep my focused attention on them. So I realized I actually had to hold myself like a statue. I had to actually stop breathing, not take a deep breath, but when I could feel that tension, I would stop breathing right there. And by this point, I was actually better at my breath was better. It gets better with this process, because we're letting the tension go, so we can actually breathe better. So I would hold my awareness on this tension until it shifted, until it let go. And then I would think the thought again, does it have the same emotion? Where is that emotion now? Is it shifted? Has it gone somewhere else? Because sometimes it would move. And then I would do the same thing, hold my awareness on it for long enough, just talk to it. I'm not trying to change it in any way. I'm just accepting it, because it's not being accepted, it's being suppressed. So when I would feel it, it would shift and it would let go. And I would do that over and over again until that thought became free from the emotions. And then I would go on with the dishes until something else came up. And yeah, it took a long time. It was dedicated work, but I could feel the benefits. So it's what I wanted to do. And I started doing it at night. Instead of tapping for that hour to an hour and a half every night, I would lie on the sofa and I would bring a thought to mind that had emotions. And at this point, maybe it was the collective traumas. Maybe it was something like the Loma Prieta earthquake I was in 1989, the year after I moved out here. So it was a big deal to be in that for me, because I didn't know if it was a big earthquake or if it was a little earthquake. Turns out it was a really pretty big earthquake. So I had a lot of memories and emotions to deal with around that. And 9/11, and just feel them until there was a shift, let it go. Do it again and again and again. And it was at some point during this process that I recognized that I could actually keep my awareness inside my body after the tension had gone. And the only way I can kind of describe this, and I don't even know if it's a good way, but it's the best way I've got, is that if you've got a toothache or a stomach ache, you can focus, you know where that is coming from. But once it's gone, you can't tell, you can't put your awareness back on that place again because it's gone. And I found that I could put my awareness inside of my body. And this kind of felt like in the next level, the next layer or next part of the journey. And I didn't know what I was doing because I'd never heard, I did a lot of research at the time, but I'd never heard anyone else doing this. So I felt like I was at new ground at this point.
Absolutely. Absolutely fascinating. And from then on, it has just been a voyage of self-discovery, I think, with yourself. I know in your book that you mentioned about breathing out as well on top of your EFT and putting this awareness into your body. And I can't pronounce the name of that Hawaiian technique as well.
Ho'oponopono.
Yes.
Yes, I do believe that can work. The thing I've realized about EFT and why that's so beneficial to begin with is because of the physical component, that we're actually tapping physically on the body, which I think is necessary maybe until you get to the point, or at least I needed it until I could get to the point that I could feel those sensations, because early on I couldn't have done that. Right? I could not have felt those feelings.
I think
so. Yeah, it has been.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to continue with my story.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So when I realized I could put my awareness inside, I started to play with it. I started to move my awareness around inside my abdomen is where I worked first. And I would notice it kind of felt like a void until it wasn't, until there was tension there. And then I would do the same thing. I would focus on the tension and hold my awareness there until it released. And then I would do it again and again and again. So the same thing that I did with the physical sensations and with EFT, but now at a deeper level inside the body. And at some point when I was doing this in my lower right abdomen, I recognize, this is a little deeper than I normally talk about, so just so you know, I recognized that there felt like there was a void where I was moving my awareness. It felt like I was kind of skipping over something. And one time I thought, okay, I'm going to actually hold my awareness on this place that feels like I'm skipping over. And I did. I held my awareness there. I realized it felt like a black hole. I held my awareness there. And then there's all this tension that had been hidden for 50 years from my foot being up against my shin. All that tension opened up to my awareness. Wow. And it had been there all these decades. I had just not known about it. I had held it back. And that's why it felt like a void. It's like I had resistance to it. And I was actually now putting my awareness on that resistance and letting it open up.
This, I'm sure anyone watching this here will be extremely interested in sound or think to themselves, wow, this sounds like a dream. This is exactly what I want. And I know that you do have a book out that we're going to discuss here. But I guess for anyone getting into this here, as you stress, first of all, the most important part, or the beginning part of this is EFT. finding yourself some good EFT videos. And as you turned around and said that there are so many practitioners out there who have chopped and changed it and modified it. And you also mentioned that, especially in the, and I know that you're a big law of attraction practitioner, and I think within the spiritual community and within the law of attraction community, there's a massive focus just on the positive aspects of this here, and people just don't want to do the sort of shadow inner work, the come to terms with the trauma and stuff like that. So could you just maybe elaborate on that there, and why you feel that is very important to do the potentially negative work to change your signal, which we'll sort of get to, and it's not just all focusing on the positive?
Right. So from now that I can actually get inside my body, I know that what's stored in there is the tension. And once we let the tension go, underneath the positive is already there. The light is already there underneath the negative. So all we need to find is the negative, the tension, the darkness, and let it go. And so when we're trying to think positively, right, when we're trying, it's the word try, whenever we're trying to do something, we're actually suppressing what we're actually feeling or thinking in the moment, and we're not accepting it. Whereas this work, what I recognize is the most important thing is actually working on what we're feeling right now and accepting it and letting it go. And that is, if we're not feeling great, if we're feeling something that's negative, that's what we want to let go. Mm-hmm. And then underneath the positive just arise. It's really weird to kind of say that. If I had heard that 10, 15 years ago, I might not have believed it. But to actually experience it is pretty amazing, right? To do enough tapping over something that has happened, and to let that go fully, and then to experience compassion and understanding arise just because you've let that go. It's an amazing experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as I said, it's not easy work. You know that, and I know that. A lot of people, it's hard to work on yourself. It's the most hardest thing to do, and to face those traumas, to face those fears, to face those hidden memories. So I think, as you rightly say there, a very important part of this here is dealing with the negative side of it. It's just not all roses and bright sunny days, like a lot of law of attraction practitioners, a lot of EFT practitioners will teach about. So it is vitally important, I think, to deal with those emotions. And I think we can kind of run away from those rather than face them. I'll deal with them another day. I'll put it off. I've certainly done that myself. But again, I think for me anyway, and I'm sure you'll agree with this here, like it just resurfaces again and again and again. And this is why we can't run away from this forever. We have to sit down and get in touch with these so-called negative feelings. So just kind of continuing on then with your journey. So you've developed this ability to look inside yourself, to put your focus on one point of your body. What then was the next step for you, just before we get on to your book?
Yeah, I had to work a while in my body before I could actually put my awareness in my head. And it was interesting because every time I did release something, I would actually release something in my head and neck at the same time. That was always part of the journey. Even if I was focusing down somewhere in my leg or something, it always also released in my neck. But once I was able to put my awareness in my head, kind of things shifted a little bit. I actually think that the skull is the holy land. So actually being able to get in here, it takes some work. And I kept going. I started putting my awareness on the tension, and there was so much tension in my head and my face. Unbelievable, the amount of pain and tension that had been in my head that I had no idea was there, right? Because that scoliosis, so my whole body was torqued, and just the forces are really out of this world. I will never be able to tell someone or explain to someone how much those forces were. And so how much out of alignment I was. And so then I would work, I would hold my awareness on some pain or tension, allow it to release, do it again and again. And at some point, I actually heard and felt something rip. It actually sounded like old fabric ripping. And I researched it, and I came to the realization that I was hearing the connective tissue release. And so, it's the first time I did that, I was a little concerned. It's like, am I hurting myself? Of course, I've never heard of anyone else doing this again. But I knew it was just part of the story, part of my journey. I seemed to have been shown the way at each stage, so I just kept going. And, I would just release more and more, and I felt the bones relax at some points, and felt what they would be in the relaxed state if I was able to hold that relaxation. So then I would just do more and more, and then they would shift. And so, at this point, I have some x-rays from 2013 and from last year that shows really the physical bones, the changes that really have taken place. So my neck has straightened, my jaw was way off to the side and is now much more in the middle, which is really nice. My eye sockets were out of alignment and they have shifted more into alignment. And I have grown half an inch as a 55-year-old, which is pretty cool.
Wow. Are these images, I do think they're available on your website, aren't they?
They are, yeah, and my YouTube channel, yes.
Oh, they're available on YouTube. I hadn't had the time to check out your YouTube, but that's another fabulous resource for people to look into. I will be posting the links on, obviously, the introduction to this podcast and wherever else that I publish this. So I guess you've developed this here, and it all sounds pretty amazing. Even up to the point where we'll just get back to tapping just for a little bit, because I realize obviously that you can use this tapping on other people. And I was listening to one of your interviews there where the story of the child on the plane.
You want me to share that?
Yeah, I thought it was brilliant. Yes.
Yeah. We were taking off in an airplane, and there was a mother with her child in her arms, and he was screaming. And you know how other people on a plane do not like that. So we got to altitude and he was still screaming. So I asked the husband to swap places with me, and he was willing. And then I asked her if it was okay if I tapped gently on her son. And I did. And I just tapped on the places, just like 2 or 3 rounds. And he fell asleep in his mother's arms. Wow. And some of the other passengers clapped because everyone was so happy. But yeah, he was feeling it, right? He was in the emotion. So I didn't need to say any words. I just tapped on the points. And so if you're feeling, right, if you're caught up in some emotion or some traumatic event, all you need to do is tap on those places, those points, and it will release the tension and calm you down. And I also did it with my son when he would have nightmares. I would just go up and tap on him. And then he would say, it's like, okay, Mom, I can go back to sleep now. And he did.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. I just wanted to get that out there because I just want people to know that it's not just yourself that you can do the work on, it's other people. That if you know and understand how tapping works, and there's someone that you know close to you or related to you, or someone just in need, that you can actually utilize this technique on them themselves. It's not just yourself. But what if there potentially isn't someone about, or maybe if you're tapping for someone who has potentially hurt you in the past, and you would like to, get that sort of cleared, to get that tension released there. I know that you've mentioned, I think it was you that developed this. Did you visualize this person in your mind, and you imagine that you start tapping on that person and having a conversation with them?
Right, I call it air tapping. Yeah, so we just imagine the person is sitting on our lap in front of us, and we tap on their points like a virtual person, and we tell them exactly what we want to say, or the words that we had in our minds, but we never actually said to them, right? Our full truth, because those words are still inside of us, right? So we want to let the energy of those words go. So if we're really annoyed with someone, we can show how annoyed we are. We can tell them exactly how annoyed we are. We can use the words that we're using in our mind. That's what we want to do. And we can let that energy go. And it's really useful because the words we use when we're saying to someone else outside of us, they're different from the words I would be using if I was tapping on myself about how frustrated I am with this person, right? It's useful to do both. Like I can work on my frustration by tapping, but if I can tell them what I think, that's really beneficial. People really seem to get a lot out of that.
And that was something that you came up with yourself?
I don't know. Well, yes. I mean, I guess so. I don't know. I haven't looked to see if anyone else does it.
Maybe you should
it's just something no, I'm not in this for the money. I'm in this to share the information.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you've developed all these techniques. You started off with tapping and you expanded that, and you developed air tapping, and then you developed this insight, and right up to the point where you were able to actually make physical changes within your body to realign your skull and your jaws, which is absolutely incredible. So then at some point you decided to collate all this information into a book. What point was that?
It was once I had developed what I call insight. I believe it's the original meaning of the word insight. I'm actually just looking inside. It's inward sight. I'm pretty sure it's the original meaning of the word. We'll see. But it was at that point because I recognized that the further I went on, I would forget the details of the journey. And it's an amazing journey. You know, nothing feels better than releasing old tension. So there was nothing I would rather do on this journey. And I know other people can do it too. I'd love other people to do it too. Because there's so much more to life at this point, right? That phrase, as within, so without, is so true, right? The more we know ourselves on the outside, on the inside, the more we know other people, the more we can see things replaying, we can see the energy in things, we can see tension in other people, we can see from different perspectives, right? My neck will move in all sorts of different orientations than it ever would in the past because I have let go of so much tension. So I can see from different physical perspectives and different mental perspectives, or whatever the other word would be, the outside area. So there's just so much more to life. And I think we have a lot of people these days who, are depressed or they don't see any future. There is so much more to life that we can find. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you called it A Path to Insight, and it's available on Amazon. It's available in paperback or Kindle version. I got the Kindle version, and as I said, it's very enlightening. So I just want to talk a bit about your book because I did make some notes, and you mentioned here in one of the very first parts that you believe that you can actually relax your way to enlightenment. Enlightenment doesn't have to be something that you have to take yourself off into the Himalayas and live as this Trappist monk and solitary thing. That it can actually just be achieved by simply learning to relax and utilizing the techniques that you have outlined in this book. Could you talk a bit about that?
Sure. Each step along the way, we're just relaxing at a deeper and deeper level. So even like lying in bed at night and relaxing the body, you can relax more than you think you can relax. I remember at the beginning of my journey, I would consciously relax each part of my body and then relax it further and further and further. And I realized I could relax further. Part of my journey along with that part is Abraham Hicks used to say, when you wake up in the morning and you feel really good before thought comes in. Well, I never felt good in the morning, ever. So I wanted to know what it was that she knew that I didn't. Like, what am I doing wrong? And I realized it's like, I'm not ever relaxed. So I realized that I could relax. And then each of these steps relaxes you at a deeper and deeper level. And I also know what I believe it's a pathway to enlightenment. Maybe there are some people who get this straight away. In my experience, it's a pathway to enlightenment. And part of that pathway is releasing the burden that we've been carrying, because we feel lighter. We don't feel as heavy or burdened. We start to feel lighter as we let go of this tension stored inside of us. But it's also enlightenment from the light darkness aspect, right? Because now I can sense inside. So once I've let go of tension inside, I can see that underneath it's light and it was dark. So there's those two aspects to enlightenment, and it's just deeper and deeper relaxation.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just take a quick look at some of these tensions that you talk about. You've compared them to like guitar strings, isn't that correct? Like a guitar string that is too tightly strung. And if you're not releasing this tension, then it builds up over time. And just like a guitar string that is too tight, it plays out of tune, but only obviously in our physical bodies, then it causes physical damage, or it causes dis-ease within ourselves. So could you just elaborate potentially on that? What causes that guitar string to be too tight, or how trauma turns into physical ailments, disease?
Yeah, so I do talk about us being like a guitar. So I'm talking more about the law of attraction type here, and that we are a signal. And the biggest part of our signal, I believe, is that tension stored inside in our connective tissue. And I said how much amazing force is in my head. So, right, if we have this connective tissue inside of us that's being held tight, like the string on a guitar, then we're not emitting a good signal, right? It's a signal that's off tune. And I believe that is stored in childhood when something happens, something traumatic, and it doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be a really small thing, but we're not allowed to be our true selves. So we don't express ourselves. And in that process of not expressing ourselves, we're actually holding our facial expression. We're holding something back in our face, which is tightening that connective tissue. And then we'll end up doing it over and over again. Each time we do it, I believe we're tightening that connective tissue. And I actually believe that's why, as we get older, we tend to shrink, right? We tend to get tighter and tighter, because we think the same thoughts over and over again. We feel the same feelings over and over again, and it's just tightening that connective tissue down.
And this all relates to trauma held within the body, because we're not allowed to release it, or we're not told to express our feelings. We're told to store them within, then we hold them within. And I guess as children, we're not really taught how to express those feelings. We're quite quickly taught from an early age what's right, what's wrong, how to behave, how not to behave. If intensely, if a child is crying or a child is in an argument, we're quite quickly there to shut that emotion down, or shut that feeling down, and tell that child to be quiet or to behave in a certain manner, so that feeling or emotion doesn't get expressed, and therefore creates unreleased tension within the body. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. I mean, one of my dad's favorite sayings was, "Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about." Right? And that, okay, I'm not supposed to be crying. And I really believe that all those tears that we never expressed in childhood are stored inside of us, and they will come out if we go back down those memories and release it. Yeah, so it is. Yeah, I believe it's totally stored inside our physical bodies as disease.
And this feeds into another part that I find quite interesting, is that because of this tension within people's bodies, it's a telltale sign of people lying, because they're not, or they're holding that tension within themselves. Whenever they speak words, it doesn't, the words come out, but it doesn't feel right. Or is that correct? Or it doesn't seem right because the person is actually lying? You'd mentioned that.
Yeah. If someone is lying, they're not, there's part of their body they don't want to feel, they don't want to see, right? Because underneath, right, a true self would not lie. So if we're going to lie, there's part of ourselves we are not comfortable looking at. So we aren't breathing into that part of us. So our voice is then going to come out differently. Yeah.
Brilliant. Do you think that this lying, or this way of looking at potentially lying, is something that you could potentially develop into some sort of technique to help people spot, I don't know, to resolve some sort of crime in regards to looking at that way at people, you know, who are lying because their voice doesn't match up with their vibration. Does that make sense?
Possibly. There are some machines out there that I think like work on your voice in terms of healing. I don't really know anything about it, but I suspect there would be a way of recognizing. Yeah.
So this signal, I just want to talk briefly about the signal within your body. You've got the flow of thoughts, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you have a strong signal and you have a weak signal. So what you're looking to do is change that strong signal. If that strong signal or that thought form is a negative thought form, to the opposite one, which potentially is the one that you want to strengthen. Isn't that correct? Yeah.
So it's like this would think of something that you want that you don't have yet, right? We know we want it, right? But this part of us knows we don't have it. And there's some resistance in us to having it, because if there was no resistance, we would already have it, right? So we've got a mixed signal if we're thinking about something we want, but we don't have it. So what we want to do, if we want to get that thing, is we want to let go of that resistance that's inside of us, the resistance to where we are right now, right? Because we're not comfortable where we are right now if we want something different. And we want to let go of the resistance to the thing. And once we let go of the resistance to that thing, then when we think about it, right, say it's a car or something that you want, if you think about that car and it only feels really good, there's no resistance there, then the energy flow is there. There's no resistance left in that energy flow. So that's I think what that part of the book is about.
Okay, and that's obviously to do with law of attraction as well, and why positive thinking just doesn't work, because you're not quite believing that, because there's resistance to that thought, isn't it? So although you're saying those positive thoughts, you're not quite believing them because the signal within your body is resisting that. So if you have a strong, trying to think of an example, if you have a, if you truly believe, well, I'm going to be a millionaire, but the signal in your body does not believe that, then this is why positive thinking does not work. So you need to change that signal within your body, and that goes along with negative thoughts as well. So if you think I'm this happy-go-lucky person, but the signal in your body, because of the trauma that you have endured, says, no, I'm not this happy-go-lucky person, I really am at heart quite miserable, then these changes won't manifest into reality or into your physical being because of that signal. So it's that signal that we need to change. So would you talk us through how you would go about changing that signal, how you go about lessening the strength of that and strengthening the opposite signal? Because you also talk about, for each signal, there's an opposite signal. For each thought, there's an opposite thought. So we need to change the thought. We need to change the signal.
Yeah, so that this comes back to finding our truth, right? So we can't always recognize it to begin with, right? But as we do more and more of this work, it becomes easier to recognize. There's also a chapter in my book that has a lot of questions that I ask, where you can find out where your resistance is, right? So if I want a brand new car, but I don't think I can have it, or I can't afford it, that's what I want to pick up on. It's like, okay, I can't afford it. Then I could tap on that and accept that, let the resistance around that go, just accept it. So I can't afford a new car. I can't afford a new car. I can't afford a new car. I just tap through all those points over and over again until it just becomes words. Okay, I can't afford a new car, right? And then I find the next resistance. It's like, what's stopping me getting that new car? Is it because I don't have enough money in my bank account, right? The more details of what it is, why it is exactly I can't have that new car, and work through all of those, right? That diminishes that negative signal. At that point, if there's no resistance left, then I can start working on, I want a new car, right? I can think about it but I'm thinking about it now from a pure signal because I've let go of the resistance. So the more I think about it and feel good as I'm thinking about it, I'm actually increasing that signal.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So I'm just looking here at the rest of your book, and I guess we've maybe covered this before, but I wanted to just clarify this here, where you just, because I've talked about this before, but I always like to get someone else's perspective on it. The different feelings, because a lot of people aren't quite clear than that. We talked about that briefly, but I didn't quite elaborate on it. And it's something.
Could you just say it again? Could you just say that again, because you cut out for a moment?
Absolutely. The difference between emotions and feelings. I've done a podcast on feelings yourself and understanding your feelings and feeling that feeling. But a lot of people don't understand that. A lot of people don't understand what the differences between emotions and what feelings are. And I love your take on it. I would love just to get you to explain that for our watchers or for our viewers.
Sure. And they're just words. And some people actually explain it, I think, the opposite to me. So, they're just words, but the understanding matters. So to me, the emotions are the words that we use to describe a set of physical sensations. So those are the feelings. The feelings to me are the physical sensations. And we get taught to just use the words. We dissociate from those feelings and we use the word frustration or sadness or anger. So, right, that's more of a mental concept. Is just the word of the emotion, whereas the feelings to me are the physical sensations, the feelings inside the body. Yeah,
absolutely. And because of these, not understanding where our feelings are coming from, it's more than just understanding the feeling itself. It's understanding what part of the body am I feeling this feeling from, and how that can affect different parts of the body. Because you mentioned in your book that you were at your orthodontist, and your orthodontist was saying that you must have had tension in your jaw because you were getting migraine headaches. And a lot of people wouldn't really relate that. They just go, well, I must have migraines. It must be my headache. I must have to take painkillers or whatever that. There must be something wrong with my head, rather than understanding that the tension is actually coming from the jaw. And that's understanding where that feeling is within your body.
Yeah, and the more you do this, right, it's go through the expansion of awareness, it becomes easier to pinpoint where that tension is coming from, right? To begin with, even on a physical level, like I might know that tension is in my head, right? But as I become aware at deeper and deeper levels, I can actually pinpoint an exact place where that pain is coming from. So in some ways, it's useful to have the knowledge that there is a place that it's coming from, even though you don't know it yet. So maybe I can share the story that I like to share about before COVID, where I had this group and we would meet once a week. And at the beginning of the group, did I say this already? I'm kind of worried I said it already.
You mentioned a little bit of it, but go ahead. I'm sure you have more to share.
About the different levels of awareness. I did share it, didn't I?
I can't remember. It's probably good. Share it again.
Okay. Okay, so I would play this series of chimes. And some people, okay, I would play the series of chimes and we would close our eyes and listen to the chimes. And then I would ask everyone to open their eyes and we would all share our experience. And some people would only hear the chimes with their ears, which sounds normal, right? We all think, okay, we're just going to hear it with our ears. But there were other people who would hear it with their ears and feel some of the sound vibrations in their body. But then on the other end of the spectrum, which is where I am now, is they could feel the sound vibrations throughout their bodies, deep inside their bodies, right? So there's a spectrum of experience, of awareness that we don't know exists, right? But now we do. Now you're all hearing this, right? There are some people out there who only have that depth of experience with awareness where they can just hear sound vibrations. They can just hear the words someone is saying. But there are other people who can feel those words inside their body. They can feel more about what's happening. And we see that in society too, right? There are people who believe what they hear. They only hear the words, but there are other people who can sense more behind the words. They can sense if someone's telling the truth, if someone's hiding something, right? So that's a huge depth of experience. And I don't even remember why I got into this at this point. You asked something or you said something. What was it you said? Do you remember?
I don't know. It was I can't quite remember. It was about the it was, no, it wasn't. I was going to say it was about the tension, but it wasn't. It must have been something else about that. It must have been about the feelings or something. I don't know. I don't know. Was this a group that you ran yourself? Was this a group that you decided that you wanted to help other people based on the knowledge that you had accumulated, and thought that, I can do something with this here prior to?
This was a tapping group. Yeah. So we would all do our own tapping. Like we had lists of our buttons. One of the weeks we would work on our buttons, and I would just set the timer for 8 minutes. We would all tap on our own for 8 minutes. Then we would share, and then we would just do another 8 minutes. So we're all working on our own issues, but we've got a focused time to do the tapping. Yeah.
Was this you? Did you was this just a shared group that wasn't? What I'm trying to understand, was this something that you initiated? Was this the sound vibrations? Was this your idea to set this up to do more than just tapping then?
Yes, I'm not entirely sure why I did those sound vibrations. I think originally it was just a way to become present. But once I realized the power of sharing this information, right? So the people who now only can hear with their ears, they now know there's somewhere they can go, right? This depth of awareness that they can aim for. And the other people know that there are some people in society who don't have what's available to them. So I think it provides understanding.
Did you ever find that any of those people who could only hear, after understanding the others in the group who could feel, did you ever find, or did it ever last long enough for those people to potentially go, oh, well, now that I know, I can potentially develop this here, and now after a period of time, I can actually feel too? Or did it ever progress that far?
I do have one or two people who can now feel inside occasionally. Yes, but they are working through, they're doing the work, they're doing the tapping.
Yeah, brilliant. So I guess the next part that I'd mentioned in your body was, mentioned in your book was, that's just cleansing the jaw and stuff like that. Yeah, it was about awareness, but you just mentioned that, hadn't you? So I guess the next part that I kind of highlighted in your book was, it's about that voice. You mentioned about that voice in your head saying that something you don't want it to be saying, when you're feeling, when you're reacting to someone or something. Anytime you catch that voice in your head saying something you don't want it to be saying. Do you remember that part in your book?
Yeah, so we can tap on that. Yeah, sometimes that voice is really quiet, right? But as you do this work more and more, the voice becomes louder. There's less holding it back, and you can recognize it more. And yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that you can tap right on those words, the exact words that voice in your mind is saying, and it will diminish that voice. One of the things that I really liked that I got to do was I went to my brother. My brother became an alcoholic. He went more down the road of my parents, and he died a few years ago. But before he died, I went to visit him in hospital, and I tapped on him, and I tapped on our childhood traumas, the ones we shared together. And it was really interesting. I think he kept those traumas in his mind closer to the surface than I ever did. So they were very available to him. So when we tapped, the next day he said they've kind of gone into the background. They kind of moved further away. So that was really interesting to hear him say that, right? So he felt things differently to me. And I think We all do. I think if he had done it, if he had taken it up and wanted to do the work, then he could possibly have turned his life around.
Right. Okay. Yeah, quite tragic. Just more about that little voice in your head, and obviously I've talked about that too. I've written a blog post. I've talked about that, about overcoming negative thinking, and just giving techniques to deal with that. But I'm sure it's that little voice that most people, if not all people, hear in their head that, as you turn around and says, I'm not good at that, I don't deserve that, I can't afford that. And you're saying here that we need to tap that voice away so that it's not there anymore. At what point do you find, or how long do you find that would take, or what do you think even that voice is? Do you think it's an ego kind of thing, or do you think it's more trauma that we've held in our body? What would you say that little voice is?
I think it's the programming that we've heard over in childhood from parents or teachers or friends, anyone. I think it's that programming. We're just saying it, or we've been told we're no good, right? So we'll say, I'm no good. Whatever it is, that voice, I do believe it can go. I'm sure it can go. I know it can go, right? So if we can catch it and tap on it, every time it comes up, every time we notice it, then eventually it will disappear.
Brilliant. Just give me 1 second. I've lost my I've lost my page. So just moving forward then in the book, let me just see now. I had made lots of notes. Now that I'm actually looking at it now, I can't actually find the half of them. Yeah, so if you could just talk a little bit more on that idea of this voice and how you could release it and how you overcome that voice to developing your potential or strengthening that other part of you that says, I am good enough, that I am capable of doing this here. I guess that's part of strengthening the signal again, isn't it? Strengthening the opposite.
Well, you can, but it's also that those thoughts come to you. Once you let go of the negative thoughts, those thoughts come to you. And it's pretty amazing when it happens. And it's really fun when it happens. So yeah, it's hard to believe, I know, until it actually happens. But yeah, if you let go of the negative, the positive will be there.
I think it's just for a lot of people, they probably would love something like that there, because I think that these negative thoughts, because we don't have techniques to deal with them, can quite quickly consume people. And as you say, end up having tragic consequences for the likes of your brother. So it's just really interesting to hear you talk about that. And I'm sure that's something that a lot of people will be interested in. But you also, I know I'm jumping ahead here slightly, but I know also that you also have another technique on top of that, which is developed from the I ams, which I think originated with Saint Germain. And that is having a statement of affirmations, or telling yourself with enough force that I am good enough, I am loved, I am a wealthy person, I am anything that you want to. So I just love to know about that.
And you can tap through that. So EFT is working on the negative. It doesn't matter what you're saying, it's always working on the negative, right? So even if you were saying, I am something positive, right? I am wealthy, I am beautiful, I am healthy, it's working on your resistance to that. Yeah. So like we were saying with the signal earlier, if you're actually feeling I'm not healthy, right? I'm unhealthy or I'm sick, you want to tap with that. That it's more powerful to find the direct negative and tap on that first. But then once you've let go of that, you can tap on the I'm unhealthy, and it will let go of the resistance you have to I am healthy.
Okay. And so I'd like to talk about your idea of this this game of life, that really ultimately at the end of the day, we should be looking at this here, that it's just a big game. It's just a game that we're playing. You know, we don't have to take it seriously. We don't have to get caught up in the trauma, the drama of life. We should just be looking at it as a game, and that helps release a lot of the tension, a lot of the fear and anger and stuff that we build up in life.
Yes, I do see it that way more and more as I go along. Once you realize that we are a signal, and this is how I think of the law of attraction, that our whole being is a signal, and we are emitting that signal every second of every day, and we're attracting everything back to us based on our signal. So if we start to recognize what we're getting in life is just a replay from something we've emitted, the signal we've emitted in the past, then we can look to see, okay, what is it I'm experiencing right now? And recognize that I've experienced this feeling before. Then we can let the feeling go. And then we can wait for, okay, what's happening next? What's next? Where's the next thing coming from? And once that comes to us, okay, what's that feeling? Right? I've experienced it before, otherwise I wouldn't be experiencing it now. I can feel it, let it go. And then, that's why at this point I will watch the news and say, okay, where's my trigger? Where's the next trigger, right? How can I get to more deeper awareness or deeper healing? And so, I recognize it's a game, and I work with, we're replaying feeling complexes is what I think. Feeling complexes of what we've experienced before. So if something's happening now that's got a lot of emotions involved around it, I can ask myself, what does this feeling remind me of? When's the first time I remember feeling this feeling? Because that memory will also be stored here. Otherwise, it won't come to mind, right? When I'm thinking, if it's connected to this feeling, it will come to mind when I think, okay, what does it remind me of? Because it's stored in the same place in the body. Those memories are stored in our body. And I know that because when I put my focused awareness on places that have tension, a place memory will just pop into my mind and be gone. So I know they're stored with the tension. So yeah, it does become fun when you start to think of it more as a game. You're less connected to those emotions. You can stand back from them and just watch them happen.
I'm like a bystander then to
Yeah.
Yeah, there's quite a lot in your book, and quite a lot of stages that you lay out, stage 1 right up to through 4, to potentially developing this insight for yourself. And it's something that I'm keen to try and explore for myself, to try and see if I can develop that insight myself. And as you mentioned, there are lots of tips and tricks and lots of phrases to look for. One of the things that you mentioned towards the end of the book is you developed this insight, and obviously it had massive changes within your skull and your eye sockets. But you also talk about this pineal gland, this third eye within the head, and how, because this is obviously a very spiritual term, the third eye, your inner sight, your spiritual experiences. And I obviously have my own experiences and my own kind of thoughts on that there, but reading your book and listening to you describe it is something that I'm not familiar with, and something that I wouldn't have discussed myself. So I'd like you just to talk a bit about that there, about how you release the tension, release the bonds in place around your third eye, and what you think that has brought for you. What sort of abilities, or what sort of insights that awakening this third eye or this inner eye has, and where you think it's located. Because as you turn around and say, a lot of people think it's traditionally in the center of the two eyes, but I think the pineal gland is centered a bit behind that, just it's in the brain there somewhere.
Right, it's in the center of the head. Yes. And yeah, I mean, I believe that's what I'm using to sense inside, right? I'm looking from somewhere, and I know I'm looking from the center of my head, but I can't tell where my awareness is. I can't tell if it's in a gland, or the only difference I can tell is the difference between bone and not bone, because bone is so much denser. but I am seeing from somewhere in the center of my head, because I can tell what's above it and what's behind it, in front of it and below it. And I am sensing, I believe, through the connective tissue, right? So when I was first able to sense inside, it was down below in my body, and I could let go of one place of tension, and then my awareness would come back out of my body, right? So I think the third eye was very tight, but I'd open up a little bit so that I could see in one particular place. And then I would go back in and loosen up more tensions, which loosened it up a tiny bit more. And once I got into my head, which is so much closer to it, I can move to different orientations and let go of more bonds. So I think I would love to see how the connective tissue is connected to the pineal gland. But I think there are many, many, many connections there. And everywhere that I've been releasing tension, I believe is also releasing the connection to the pineal gland, or wherever it is that I'm sensing from.
Yeah. You just seem to use it in a very different manner than I kind of maybe a lot of people would in the kind of spiritual community, psychics and mediums and stuff like that. They would obviously use it to see visions or potentially see auric fields and stuff like that. I've never heard anyone describe it in quite the manner you do, which is absolutely fascinating. The one thing that I can, but maybe not just the one thing, but one thing that did quite strike me, and one thing that I did kind of latch on to, was that you described a burning sensation, and that seems to be quite common for people who are in the process of activating their third eye or awakening their third eye. And a lot of people traditionally, you've probably noticed yourself, would attribute that to the decalcification of the third eye, which is built up by fluoride intake. And I know that you have mentioned that you have eliminated fluoride from your diet and from your drinking and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure I ever had much fluoride in anything, because I've known for a long time not to do that. And I did use iodine for a while, so I did consciously try and decalcify it quite a few years ago now. Yeah, but I think a lot of people, when they're talking about opening the third eye or using techniques to do that, they're just focusing on this one place. But in my experience, you have to let the tension go throughout the body. It's all connected, and just working on one place, just letting the tension go in one place, is not freeing the soul, because I believe what I'm doing is freeing the soul from its bonds. And once it's free, once it's comfortable in this body, it's actually going to stay in this body. And I think using some of maybe those psychedelics, some of those substances people use to try and have an experience through the third eye, I believe that that's actually making the soul so uncomfortable that it leaves the body for a while. So I kind of think those are two ends of the same stick, the comfortable soul and the uncomfortable soul.
It sounds, as I said, it's looking at a lot of the things that I mentioned to you before is kind of going, that's a different perspective on maybe some of the stuff that I'm used to or the techniques, but I can definitely find similarities. The way that you're saying there about, it's not just about concentrating on that third eye or that indigo energy center or brow chakra, if you like. It's about the whole body and about aligning the whole body, releasing the tension within the body. And that's, as I said to you, that's something that I've talked about in some previous podcasts, about this idea of examining each chakra, each of the major 7 chakras in your body for, you would call it tension, I would call it blockages. So examining points of your body to find out what's stopping me in here. You know, what part of my body here, what does this represent that I have a problem with here, and trying to understand it and resolve it, and so that you can release that tension around that area. So it's just fascinating hearing your take on it. But as I said, for me, it's related to your idea. It's about understanding what blockages that we have in these particular things, becoming aware of them, making peace with them, removing the tension within them so that we can potentially release the bonds or whatever that is, release this flow of energy up into that pineal gland to activate it for whatever purpose that that we use. I've just actually noticed that you you actually had a quote there from Hermes Trismegistus, which is very good. You also have a quote there from Matthew, which is attributed to Jesus. This says, "The light of the body is in the eye."
Yeah, well, that goes back to me saying that I can see that underneath is light, right? So I'm sensing the light. And I think we're fully light underneath all the baggage that we have stored. And once we let go of it, we will be light.
You think that this is what Jesus was referring to in that parable, this third eye?
I suspect so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Brilliant. So I'm just looking at a few other things here. You mentioned the higher self and spirit, that once we have this tension in our body, it blocks that spirit communication. That because we have these negative thoughts within our thought pattern stored within tension in our body, then any spirit communication comes through perhaps as ego consciousness. Whereas if we believe that tension, we believe those negative thought patterns, then it comes through as pure consciousness, because we're more in alignment with ourselves. We are not having a negative charge to our bodies. Could you talk a wee bit about that?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the law of attraction. I think of us as the signal, and that tension distorts our signal. So we can't tune in. We're not in harmony, full harmony with spirit, if we've got some distortions to our signal. So we're not putting out a clear signal, and we're not attracting back a perfect signal from spirit. So yeah, so as we release it more and more, I believe we're releasing our ego more and more. And yeah, then we become more in alignment with spirit. We tune in more.
Yeah.
Right? There's less resistance holding us back.
It's a fascinating way of looking at it. I've never thought about that before. So that's why I find your book so very fascinating. Having experience of doing psychic work and mediumship and being in large groups of people, I know that what holds a lot of people back from that is the tension within their body. It's the fear of failure. A lot of that is based on trust, and a lot of it is based on having a sort of confident, not quite confident, but allowing yourself to sort of be fully in the moment, if that kind of makes sense. And to me, this could be attributed to that there, where we have those negative thought patterns surrounding this. I can't do this. I'm afraid. What if I fail? Maybe they'll laugh at me. I think it blocks that communication from coming through. So just the way you describe it was kind of fascinating for me, as I know that these are a lot of things that hold people back from developing. It doesn't even have to be mediumship, but to even developing that communication with source or with God, to listening to that voice within their head, especially when they're asked to maybe do it in a public format. All those little negative thought patterns start to take over, and you're attributing this to obviously the tension held within our body. So it's a fascinating way of actually looking at it, and it's something that maybe I'll take myself and go off and potentially use. But yeah, absolutely amazing book. There's probably more in it that I could potentially fit in this book. I have so many points here, and I don't know if I'm going to fit them all in. Tell me, if you don't mind, I've just highlighted the few words that you have mentioned, like response and words that got responsibility. Can't find the other ones, but react. Could you tell us a little bit about your concept of those words? Because we just say them without really sort of breaking them down and going, well, what does this word actually mean? And you've actually done this in your book. You've taken some of these words, broke them down and looked at how they could be impacting us?
Yeah, I love to play with the words like that, but you're right, because we use them and we're not aware of what we're saying. But yes, when we react to something, we are reacting. We are doing it again. Re means doing over again, and act that we have played before. So we're reacting something that we have reacted to before, and it's an ongoing process. We keep reacting, we emit that signal, we bring it back to us, and we react again. Yeah, and yeah, replay. Yeah, I can't think of some of the other words right now, but the word dis-ease too.
Yeah, you had responsibility was another one of yours.
Right, our ability to respond. Yeah, if we take full responsibility, then we are taking responsibility for our ability to respond. So we can change it right then in the moment, and that changes our signal. It changes our future. Yeah. So yeah.
And become, I think, was the last one that I'd highlighted there.
Become, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever we are being, we are sending that signal out, and we're going to become. That's what we're going to become. It's going to come to us.
And perhaps just finally here, you mentioned in your book as well that a lot of spiritual teachers often say things like, you need to live in the present. You're not living in the present. The power is in the present moment. And you talk about something that I have touched upon and that I speak about, is that most people do not actually live within the present. They're too focused upon past events that have happened or future events. So they're completely missing out on the present or the presence. Could you give us your version of that there and what you talk about in the book?
Yeah, this work brings you right into the present moment. And the present moment is where our power is, right? Because when you think about the signal, right, if we change ourselves right now, we change our present signal, we are changing our future. Yeah, so that's where our power is right now. We have that power to change. We can change our past right now, right? By looking at our past events and tapping on it and letting it go. That's changing our now, which is changing our future. So absolutely, our power is right now. But one of the ways to find our now that I've found really helpful, especially when someone's going through something, is just to describe what's happening right now, right? So I'm sitting in a room that's got one blue wall, one pink wall, two purple walls, and a green ceiling. And I'm sitting on a comfortable chair. I've got a microphone in front of me. I've got headphones on. I'm talking to you, right? Just describing the present moment will bring you into the present moment. So you can do that when you're driving in a car, right? You can describe what you're seeing as you go, which brings you right into the present moment. And that's then when your power is.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are looking to the future, and I hope this is going to be okay. I hope, looking to the future and wish fulfilling instead of realizing that it's actually the present that creates the future. And it's your vibration and your thought patterns that you're currently thinking now and living in the present that will create that positive outcomes for you in the future. So yeah, absolutely.
Right, but the key thing about that is not to suppress it. Yeah. Right, we don't want to suppress it. We don't want to try and think the positive because we're afraid of what we're thinking right now. We actually want to accept what we're thinking and feeling right now, which changes it, right? It's a subtle difference, but once you really get it, it's so important.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, we should have touched upon that earlier, but it's this idea that we shouldn't suppress those negative emotions. If you're feeling hate, we're told that we shouldn't feel those emotions, to shunt them away, but that's actually not helpful. We should be allowing that hate to come into us and examine it and feel it and deal with it. The same with anger and frustration. Isn't that what you're saying there? It's harmful.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd much rather have those feelings out of my body than have them stored inside. So yes, if I'm hating something, I want to tap on that and I want to feel what that hatred feels like in my body and allow that stuck energy, it's just stuck energy, to allow it to pass through. Yeah.
Brilliant. And obviously then feeding into that there is your idea of forgiveness. My last podcast, which was a converted blog post, which was based around the concept of forgiveness, because I had a I suffered a hijacking, and I think everyone that I encountered had an opinion on the persons involved, that they had a lot of negative emotions towards them. And for me, I felt actually nothing. I felt nothing but forgiveness, because I think we're not really going to get into it here, but it's this idea of having this expanded awareness due to an active third eye, of seeing these other viewpoints. And for me, it was kind of looking back over that person's shoulder and looking back along that person's life path to potentially understanding what has led that person from when they were a child up to the point where they feel the need to commit an act like that. So potentially understanding, what could have caused that person to be like that? What external factors are there? Are there any other viewpoints, rather than this narrow-minded viewpoint of that person done something wrong, so that person should face X, Y, and Z? So, as I said, it fed into my concept of forgiveness. And I know that you've talked a bit about that in your book. Could you give us a little bit on forgiveness?
Sure. Forgiveness is really important. And I really feel like once you can think of somebody with no emotions arising, then you have forgiven them, right? If you can see them again, right? If you could see this person again now and nothing arose in you, that would be forgiveness in my mind, because then you're at peace, right? Then your signal around them is at peace. You're attracting peace back into your life. So to get to forgiveness, I mean, if someone did not have the awareness that you had, right, that would be something to tap through the whole event over and over, and air tap on the person and tell them exactly what you think or what you thought or whatever you want to tell them, but to talk it out so that it's out of your body. Yeah, and then do it over. That's the key, is actually doing it over and over again, right, until there's nothing left. And then we're relaxed on the inside, right? The signal that we're emitting is one of peace, and that's changing our future.
Brilliant, brilliant. There's so many good things in your book. As I said, I've went through it all, and I've noted so many of them, so many of that as I said, I can relate to, perhaps just on a different perspective. And it really is amazing. I can't really recommend it enough. You also mentioned that food, drink, and clothing can also play a part in your journey too. Could you talk a little about that? Because I also would talk a bit about food and drink, the food that you consume, the liquids that you drink, and the clothing that you wear.
Right. The whole of us is a signal, right? It's not just, I think the biggest part of the signal is the tension that we hold on the inside, but it's also our shape, our size, the clothes we wear, our hair. Everything about us is the signal, and we attract back from other people and into our future based on that signal. So it's a part of everything, right? The food that we eat is a part of it. So if we're eating really junky food, then that's a part of us, and that's a part of our signal. So to me, it's important to eat food that feels good to you, right? So I might eat some things that other people think are not good to eat, but if I am at full peace with it and it is beneficial food, then that becomes a part of my signal. And if I'm wearing something that feels good to me, I love colors. I absolutely love the color blue. I feel so comfortable in blue, and I pretty much only wear blue these days because I feel totally at peace with blue. Now, if I put something on that was perhaps orange or something, I wouldn't feel comfortable. My signal would not then be one of comfort or peace. And so that would change my future. So it's important for me to find what feels peaceful and beneficial, right? So that my signal is going to be the best it can be.
Brilliant. It's so simple when it's laid out like that, but yet so many people don't actually think about things like that. They're all about potentially racing ahead to doing things like that. And these are things that anyone can do right now to help change their signal, to help change their vibration, choosing to wear clothes that are potentially not pretty or nice looking, but you actually just feel comfortable so that you're relaxed within your body, eating food that feels right rather than potentially junk food that's potentially going to sit in your body and cause bad feelings because of the physical sensations. Just
Yeah.
fantastic.
I love to eat. I love dark chocolate. I really love dark chocolate. It tastes so sublime to me, right? But if I didn't think that that was good, if I thought that was a bad thing to eat, and I ate it every day, that's a mixed signal, right?
Yeah.
And that's the signal I'm emitting, and I'm getting back that mixed signal. So if I can let go of any resistance I have, and I believe it's the food of the gods, and it tastes so good and it's good for me, if I have that clear belief, then it's totally fine that I eat dark chocolate.
Brilliant, yes. And another thing that I picked up on is like me, you don't wear sunglasses and probably don't use a sun visor.
I do sometimes wear a sun visor, but yes, I don't wear sunglasses. But there was a time that I had so much tension stored in my body. I was really toxic for many years, and I couldn't go outside without sunglasses. So that's something that's cleared out as my body's cleared out, as the tension has released. I don't need to wear sunglasses.
For me, well, the reason why I don't wear sunglasses is because it blocks out the sunlight, which is obviously, as you've mentioned in your book there too, that you believe, and I have read this before and I've talked about it before, it's so beneficial to the pineal gland, potentially helping to unblock that spiritual energy, the energy that's up there, but also to boost the serotonin and the melatonin within the thing. So that's just the reason why I don't use sunglasses, but it was just interesting to hear you. But I think we've reached pretty much the end of your book. I've pretty much been through it all, and as I said, it's just absolutely fascinating. I could talk all night about it and throw different concepts around, but we need to end this podcast somewhere. So I'd just like to end off, and is there some sort of statement that you could sum up? Is there some sort of advice, especially in this current world that we face in 2022, which is so divided with people? There are people that are just so divided, and it's really not helpful, because people are just failing to see the opposite view. So I'm wondering, is there some sort of piece of advice based on what you have learned, the techniques that you've developed, that you could potentially offer people who are listening to this podcast or watching it, that could be helpful for them if they're kind of stuck and don't know which way to move forward, just in this world today, but also potentially going forward in life in general?
Sure. So realizing that our power is in the moment, and our power is in those feelings. So even with all these things that we are divided about, we have emotions around them. So we might not think we can control them in any way, but the way we can take control of that is, or take responsibility for that, is to work on how we feel, right? Because we have feelings around the other side, right? Maybe we really hate the other side. We hate what they're doing, or we don't agree with them. Whatever those feelings or those words we would use for the other side, we can tap on those. We can let that emotion go, because when we let it go, we can come together in peace, right? Because we feel peaceful, then we attract peace into our future. So we can always take responsibility. Our part in any equation is how we feel about it. And we can work with those feelings and let them go.
Brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. Well, Anne, I cannot thank you enough. It has been an absolute pleasure. You're such a fascinating person. And I could talk for hours with you, and I would love to have you on if you agree at some other stage to perhaps even talk about some of the stuff that we didn't get talked about, or whatever else you'd like to talk about. I'm sure the watchers and the listeners have really enjoyed you. I've enjoyed it. I'll post links to your book, to your website. Please, people, get this book. It is so beneficial. There's so many good techniques in it. Whether you're starting off on your journey of healing, whether or not you are some way through it, even if you're potentially like me, who has their own techniques and advice, there's so much in this book that can help you that you potentially would not have thought of before. And I can't thank you enough, Anne.
Thank you. It's been great.